Sunday School teacher, thank you for joining us as we wrap up our series in the book of Ephesians. We're going to be in Ephesians chapter 6, and we're preparing the lesson for Sunday, November the 24th. So let me go ahead and wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving. And we're going to be looking at the point of this lesson is this, that God provides believers with all the resources needed to live Christ-like lives. And we're going to be looking at the spiritual armor, God's spiritual armor. And so the title of this lesson is Walking to Battle. In this session, Paul will explore the analogy of a Roman soldier's equipment to prepare believers for the inevitable spiritual warfare that they must fight. Paul emphasized that God provides the resources needed for believers to live victorious, Christ-like lives. And by ending his letter with an appeal to be aware of the devil's schemes, Paul was emphasizing the reality of the devil and the evil that he wishes to do. The devil is at work in the world. Nevertheless, the devil is already defeated by Jesus through his death on the cross and resurrection. In this passage, we will learn not only about God's provision of all the resources that we need to prevail in spiritual battles, but also about our need to be prepared on a daily basis for the spiritual battles and depending upon the Lord. So let's jump into these. The first thing that Paul says in chapter 6, verse 10 through 13 is that we need to be aware. Look at verse 10. He says, "Finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by His vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities and against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against this evil spiritual forces in heaven. For this reason, take up the full armor of God so that you may be able to resist the devil, and having prepared everything, to take your stand." So, Paul says, first of all, we've got to be aware. Be prepared to take a stand against the devil, realizing that the true battle of this earth is with him and his evil forces. This is a spiritual battle. And Paul says you need to be ready. We have the beginning of his conclusion. Paul says, finally, and that's where he begins to wrap up his letter. He says in verse 10, that we need to keep on being empowered by God, and that power is greater than any other power. He says in verse 10, be strengthened by the Lord and His vast strength. It's more powerful than anything. In verse 11, that is where Paul begins to use the imagery of a soldier's armor. It is through God's armor you will be able to stand and stand strong. And Paul says here in these verses, in verse 11, put on the full armor of God so that you can stand, so that you can be successful, so that you can live. And he goes on to say, why